So I've just finished a night shift as usual. This is when I make the majority of my videos at 20 past 12 in the middle of the night, sometimes even later. But I thought a great one to talk about would be FUT and FUE, because they're just a little recap again. I have had both, so it's always great, I believe, to get a perspective of someone who has had them, because you will get a very different answer from a textbook. From a physician themselves will give you a different answer about the reality of FUT and FUE, their version, and then you have the patient's version, because most physicians themselves have not had FUT and FUE. They don't live with it. So I think it's nice to discuss the reality of living with it and having it on your head and being through the process, knowing what the donor is like, its impact, what is it like to get a shorter haircut on the two, is there any changed angle of direction, gradation pattern in the back of the head, is there any textural differences, these things, because textbook answers are great and they give you the bulk of information, but it's always nice to get the little touches from the people who live with it, such as myself. So the thing that I'm most satisfied about when it comes to FUT and FUE is that my very first transplant, which I insisted on, was an FUT. Now, it is unfortunate that in this day and age, most people aren't getting FUT anymore, and certainly not my generation. It's very sad, to be honest, because FUT is just a wonderful technique, and I do believe that by starting with strip, you're at the biggest advantage, and there's a couple of reasons for this. So, number one, I wanted to start with strip because everything then above, below, to the left, to the right of that incision is untouched. It's a virgin scalp. The density isn't affected. The only area where the density is so marginally affected is just around the scar, roughly that area itself, but you wouldn't even notice it. And remember, a strip scar can be very easily covered by just having a little bit of scissors work above the scar, like as in a millimeter or two, and then you can do whatever grade you want around it. For example, 2, it works out great. And starting with a strip also takes advantage of elasticity in the scalp that hasn't been compromised yet, because the more strips you do, the more you compromise your elasticity, as in it becomes more and more likely that you're going to get scar stretching the more strips you do, because you're increasing tension on that area, and there's only so much strips we can really get away with. The bigger the strip, the increased chances of getting scar widening. But in general, and those of us who have decent elasticity, the first time you do it, you'll get away with a good scar in all likelihood if you're in very good hands. And of course, we all scar differently. Some of us are more prone to scarring than others. But I wanted to start with strip for that reason. So I didn't want to compromise my density, because I knew I was going to live with a transplant for a couple of years before I get another transplant. And as a young guy, I identify with a very thick donor. It's just it's part of me, simply put, and to lose that would be a loss of identity in part, because FUE does thin out the donor at an increased rate compared to strip. Even if you do 1,000 FUE, which I've done, it'll thin the donor out more. And I can fully attest to that, because again, I've lived with it. And it makes a lot of sense, because, like, okay, I love analogies. Let's take let's take cheese with loads of holes in it, right? That's like FUE. You can clearly see that the cheese isn't a solid block anymore. Now, if you get a solid block of cheese and then you just cut it in the middle and then pull it back together, it's still a solid block of cheese. Nothing has been affected above and below where that cut has been made. This is essentially what strip is like. It really leaves the donor density as pristine to almost as original condition as possible. As I said, just with the exception of around the scar where you get that slight bit of stretching in that area, but it's hardly noticeable. Now, another reason why I absolutely love FUT is you're getting the thickest hairs from the back of the head. It's a whole load of thick caliber hairs that you move to the front, which means you get the most density possible. Pi r squared. The thicker the caliber, the more coverage one gets. If you do FUE, you're cherry picking grafts. So you're going to get a mixture of nice thick ones and finer ones. There's no, the uniformity isn't as high with FUE. And you do tend to get, from my experience doing anyway, a softer appearance. Now that's great, but I prefer strong density because with my hair, because it is, most of it is natural, and it has been optimized by medication, but there's a very small band at the front that's been transplanted, so I need pretty much supreme density in order to blend with everything else that you see. So this is why strip worked out so well as a choice for the majority of work. I do believe firmly if I had done this all as an FUE, the density wouldn't be the same, because I have again had FUE in areas of the scalp where it was pretty much bare, and then I've had FUT in areas of the scalp where it was pretty much bare, and I can see a difference. The FUE is less dense, whereas the FUT has better density because it's thicker grafts. It's as simple as that. So this is another reason why I really like strip. Now, again, in terms of the longevity of hair, strip, I feel, is still the winner, because you're taking it from that region at the back of the head where you're not going to get ascending hair loss from the nape and descending hair loss from the crown, should you be in that position where your crown dips, which quite a few people will be in. So it's the safe zone. And if we do FUE, there's increased risk of having those grafts in the future succumb to miniaturization, a higher percentage of them, because again, you have to have a wider extraction. It depends on the surgeon. This is what it's all about. A lot of surgeons out there go really high up into the crown, which is super high risk, because the crown balls on a lot of men, and then if it dips into an area that was harvested 10 years ago, those grafts that are now placed in the front will fall out. And a lot of surgeons do this. They go way too high into the balding margin that's coming in the future. Another thing, now a respectful surgeon obviously will completely decrease the chances of that happening by having a very strategic mapping of the donor area. But again, there's still risk. For example, above the ears, guys can get a retrograde pattern of hair loss. And if you go too close to the ears with your FUE extraction, which again you find in quite a few clinics, those hairs will fall out. If your FUE extraction goes too close to the nape, which again, I know I'm repeating myself, but it happens. And it's quite shocking. A lot of this kind of reckless extractions do come from places like Turkey. And again, there's some clinics in Turkey that are great, and there's guys out there who've had great results from Turkey. I've met one who has a stunning extraction. So that's not to discredit all of Turkey. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, I've seen a high proportion of these reckless, unethical extractions come from Turkey, and good God, I feel sorry for the young guys who, in 15 to 20 years' time, there's going to be an epidemic of transplant repair patients. It's really sad, and there's YouTubers out there who have had horrific work done, and yet they're making videos as if everything is hunky-dory. Again, I will never ever on this channel show a picture of someone else's work or mention a name, because it's totally disrespectful to other people. I really detest these videos where they comment on other people's cases that I've seen. It's in very bad taste. Anyway, so FUT, these are the reasons why I really like this technique. FUE, on the other hand, I really think it is better for smaller cases. Now, again, some guys will just want to go ahead and do FUE because they just can't bear the strip scar. Well, yeah, of course, then they're FUE candidates, provided that, of course, they are a transplant candidate to begin with. I'm just giving my own personal preferences here. I'm not speaking for everybody. But FUE, I prefer it in smaller cases for two reasons. One, you can cherry pick finer grafts to do some refinement, so you can introduce them among the thick strip grafts, for example, in the hairline or around the temples for the apex, this sort of thing, to add some naturalness, as in you're making it a bit softer, and again, trying to mimic what occurs in nature, whereas where you have that blend, because in nature you have miniaturized hairs, fine ones among some thicker terminal hairs. So the fine FUE hairs that you can cherry pick, you can try and replicate that, because we don't want uniformity across the board. Again, if you have pure thick uniform grafts, it will to a degree look transplanted. It's just, the density can be superb. It can be a bit irresistible. So this is where, by putting FUE in, it increases the naturalness. I've had this done. I've had pure strip in the front, and then we went back and we did some nice FUE to get it nice and refined and have a mixture of thick grafts and finer ones. So FUE can be good like that, and the second reason by doing smaller FUE cases is you're not depleting the donor, which is super important. If you do too much FUE on the donor, you can get coalescing of scar tissue, and it just doesn't look right. It looks like something's gone on. And who wants to spread the baldness from the front to the back? Another thing is you can't have abrupt changes in hair caliber. You can't have a sudden pattern difference where your hair is really thick and then you come to a zone where it's thinner. The human eye will perceive this immediately. They'll be able to spot that kind of square zone where the grafts are just thinner, because you're breaking a pattern. This doesn't occur in nature. So this is why, again, if you're doing FUE, it's best to do it in small sessions. And you can do a few small sessions to add up, sure, but when you start taking thousands and thousands of grafts in one go, especially going to a surgeon who isn't skilled, you're just adding all the red flags together and increasing the risk of a disastrous outcome. So we must be very careful. Anyway, this is really my take on it. It can be different for other people. I'm a strip guy at the end of the day, and strip is for building, FUE is for painting. Doing some touch-ups and refinement. This is my take on it overall, and I'll be trying to stick with strip for the bulk going forward. But I'm not done with FUE, because I'll need again FUE for little touch-ups in the future, and FUE can be good for other things, like, for example, transplanting a strip scar. Little things like that. So hopefully this video was intriguing on FUT and FUE from the perspective of a patient who has had both. Whatever technique you choose, the very best of luck to you, and I hope you have a great outcome in your hair restoration endeavours. Okay, cheers now. So I don't think the cheese analogy was my best attempt, and I think maybe a visual exercise will reinforce more the effects of FUT and FUE on the donor, to visualize this, because visual exercises and analogies are really good because you can make complex topics digestible. And it's really important because most people, according to the stats that I was reviewing there recently, are in their 20s of those who are watching these videos. And you guys are the most important because you haven't had anything done yet, and you're doing your early research to become thoroughly informed patients. So yes, but before I do this, I'm going to have a sip of Sauternes. This is a 2007 Grand Cru Sauternes that I've been sipping away on, getting slightly drunk for the last 2 hours. So it's perfect to keep my attention going on this. Now, the FUE, let's start with that. Okay, so the FUE, imagine this, right, in the donor. Thousands of punctate scars where the grafts have been removed, okay? It causes massive alteration to the back of the head. Now, that result, because you're removing hairs, you now don't have a uniform flow of hair density, which is found in nature in those who just have a healthy donor, where there's no miniaturization. It's uniform. The FUE, even though it is random, this is where you get into the issues with it. When you cut your hair short, these scars become visible because the light reflects against the scar tissue, and all of these random punctate scars become perceivable. I see it in my own case when I go to a grade 1. Even though I'm Caucasian, so the white skin allows for a better blend with the scar tissue, in certain light, in certain angles, when I position myself, I can see the reflection of light against the scar tissue, and I can see hundreds of little punctate scars at the back of the head. FUE can be really well hidden at a grade 3 haircut and above. Obviously, one wants to have a random extraction so that there's no perceivable pattern. But as I was saying, when you get to a very tight haircut, it will become perceivable. Don't fall for the myth that FUE is best for those who want a tight haircut. This isn't true at all. FUT is actually much better if you want a tight haircut, because all you do is keep the hair a little bit longer above the FUT scar, and it's perfectly hidden. Because with the FUT strip, when it's removed, everything above and below that incision is virgin. It's untouched. It has uniform hair density that is found in nature because you haven't done anything to it yet. This is why it's a fantastic procedure for preservation of the donor. When you look at the proportion of unaltered scalp compared to altered, there's hardly any of it that has been altered. It's just that linear scar tissue, because obviously you do You stitch it up, do the trichophytic closure, and then over the year scar tissue forms. Now the interesting thing about the scar tissue is it varies in width across the linear strip scar. So what we tend to find is at the middle of the scar, that region tends to have the best closure, and the would you call the tightest scar, whereas towards the boundaries, the outer edges of the FUT scar, you tend to get a bit of widening. Now that's interesting, and it's all to do with Langer's lines of tension. So collagen, the structural protein, is anisotropic, which means it follows directionality. Now Langer's lines exist basically as this. I'm going to draw them for you in the back of the head. Now in hair transplantation we do violate them sometimes, but if you follow Langer's lines of tension, if you follow them parallel, you have an area of the least possible tension. When you go against the collagen directionality and you violate them, you get increased tension in that area. So in the back of the head, with the strip scar here, in the middle, you find people have the tightest closure here because it's parallel to the collagen directionality, right? Whereas at the edges around here and here, where the scar tends to curve up as it goes above the ear, it violates collagen directionality, and thus there is more tension and you get a wider scar. If you didn't catch that, this is what it's like. Langer's lines of tension. The scar is tighter here where it is parallel to them, and where it violates the lines you get scar widening. This is what tends to happen because these areas have increased tension. So this is a disadvantage to FUT, and it varies from person to person, which makes the nature of it unpredictable. There is a risk there. The thing is, FUT and FUE, it's a personal choice if you're a candidate for both, but it is a trade-off either way. Each technique has its pros and cons unique to them, and there is a degree of crossover. But this is all a game of risk that you're trying to minimize. It's a trade-off no matter what way you look at it. No matter what technique you choose, you're going to have to live with it forever, and you're going to have to suss out for yourself, is that trade-off worth it? And that is up to you to decide. So go out and do your research. Look at patients like me who've had both. I have my own biases, so don't just listen to me. Go out and listen to other people and collect a statistical average, and you can then elucidate for yourself what surgery, what technique you would prefer to go with, should you be a candidate for either of them. Now, the very best of luck, and thanks for watching the video. Hope it's been informative. Pleasure.